Now, the labor law, job security aspect aside, the real question is whether, in fact, Nathan's firing would have passed just cause threshold because of his wildly horrendously anti-Semitic tweet. So let's do. Do you have the tweet for us, Forrest?
Yeah.
Let's look at the. Here it is.
There it is. Did you know that U.S. Congress is not? So this is about when the COVID relief, the grotesquely inadequate COVID relief was being passed. At the same time, there's a bunch of new U.S. military aid to Israel, and so Nathan tweets out this honestly very mildly jokey tweet. Says, "Did you know that the U.S. Congress is not actually permitted to authorize any new spending unless a portion of it is directed towards buying weapons for Israel? It's the law." And then, this is my favorite part, or if actually not the written law, second tweet, then so ingrained in political custom as to functionally be indistinguishable from law. Because even when we figured this out, the thought crossed his mind, oh my God, if somebody takes
what
this.
If someone's so naive or operating in bad faith? Well, you and Katie Halper on her show the other night put me on trial and exonerated me on anti-Semitism charges, but convicted me on offenses to comedy, a comedic malpractice for explaining the joke after telling it.
Yes, I stand by. I stand by both.
She called me today and asked me if I saw that, if I watched the stream, and I was like, oh, I didn't get a chance to. And then she's like, watch it, and like put it on, I guess, Instagram. Was like really excited that she had thought of doing that.
Yeah, I should say that I'm part Jewish, wasn't raised as anything. I didn't want to make these caveats because I didn't want to step on her bit and be convicted of offenses against comedy myself. I might also, as I pointed out I did point out at the time, I might be, I think I would be wildly disqualified from any actual tribunal on this subject. But I do think, since I've known Nathan, for a while, we wrote an article together. He blurred my book, but I mean, this is a very strange because I want to get into this a little bit because this is a deeply strange thing. The first charge, the anti-Semitism charge, and because on the face of it, this is just bizarre. I mean, this is like saying if you said. If you were complaining in parallel terms about U.S. military aid to the House of Saud, would that be Islamophobia? Would anyone even say that was Islamophobia? If you were complaining about the U.S. Backing of the semi-fascist Modi administration in India, well, actually, some people.
Yeah, they would jump.
Well.
They would 100%.
No, but this is the thing. Is that this is often used to exempt governments from criticism. This charge of singling out the idea, and in fact, the editor said in the email to me that I was singling out the only Jewish state. And a parallel to it is actually the way that the United States immunizes itself from criticism by calling people anti-American. This has been long been one of the main charges levied at Noam Chomsky is, why do you single out the United States for all of this criticism? You must hate America uniquely. You must be, because you're critiquing America. And so that's a great way for any country to say, well, why are you picking on us? You must have some sort of strange bias against us because you didn't talk about every other country simultaneously, which is impossible.
And it feeds into the woke discourse of when it's at least Israel, or when it's, I mean, pro Modi troll accounts are actually really good at doing that.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I actually do. It struck me as I was doing that last week that when people were, in my view, rightly criticizing Tulsi Gabbard for her being, making, some supportive comments about Modi for laying, a wreath on him. She, or that's not the right word, but whatever, you know what I mean, the garland, whatever that was. Then there were people saying that raising this issue was like anti-Hindu, prejudice.
Yeah, I had the misfortune of managing the TMBS YouTube channel while the simultaneous Tulsi Gabbard criticism videos were going up and Andrew Yang criticism videos were going up.
The two most well-adjusted groups of So do you have Forrest? Do you have the emails from the Guardian editor? Because I think
well, I can just pull them up on the actual article. I feel like might be the easiest way to do it. I have them as its own thing, but I have the one that isn't the.
I assume you're not going to read them in an Irish accent like Katie Halbert did the other night, Ben.
No, I am not going to make any.
But if anyone does want to hear the emails read in an Irish accent, so first, if you could just scroll up to the first email from the original email from John Mulholland, because this is my reply to his original email.
Oh yeah, there it is. Private and confidential.
Yeah. Private and confidential. So much for that.
Can you expand that for us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that a little bit better?
If you click it, it should go full. I think it.
There we go. Hi there. So Nathan, hi there. As you, in fact, to be more legit,
we experience this. Every time anyone reads this, I get the pit in my stomach again that I got when I opened this email the first time.
This is trauma therapy.
As you partly present yourself as a Guardian columnist, i.e., I think what he means is that in like the Twitter bio and things like that, it listed the things you do, and it listed one of those.
But note that there's this weird, subtle, like almost suggestion that I'm not a Guardian columnist, that I'm like presenting myself as a Guardian columnist. He says that twice, I think. Present yourself, and I thought,
that was your official title. Yes, I mean, like that's
my title was columnist. It says on the website, Nathan Robinson's Guardian U.S. columnist.
As you partially present yourself as a Guardian columnist, allow me to express my concern when you make an assertion such as this, which is the first amazing part of this, that is treating what. I mean, I just have to think that anybody who's made out of human parts understands as a joke, as an assertion. No such law.
Oh, really? You know,
clearly, Nathan, you thought that this was an actual law, but just to be clear,
but thanks for that.
there's no actual law saying this. In which case, this is, as one might say, if that's an interesting way to put it too, as one might say, fake news, irrespective of the later tweet where you say it is indistinguishable from law. It is not law.
Irrespective.
So it doesn't matter that you even committed this offense against comedy and said, just to be clear, that was a joke. I know it's not a law.
No, because it's irrespective of that.
Yes.
Somehow.
Yes. Given the reckless talk over the last year and beyond of how mythical Jewish groups / alliances, and it's funny, that's in quotes, although I don't think that's actually a quote from anyone, but who knows.
Reckless? What is he talking about? Like, is he talking about just general anti-Semitism? Like, was there a particular?
I'm very curious actually about whether he thinks he's quoted somebody or.
He might be referring to like the Ilhan Omar smears that came out about like money and
Ilhan Omar said, actually use those words.
Oh no, not as a quote. I'm saying just trying to, I guess, place the context of, because he says I thought he said within the last year. Yeah.
Given the reckless talk over the last year, so it's a little unclear why in particular the last year. I should also say that the Guardian does have a history of going along with this sort of thing. That in their British incarnation, they were very much part of the smear campaign against Jeremy Corbyn on the same charge. So it's possible that he's throwing a lot of different things, some of which are maybe actual anti-Semitism, some of which might be obliviousness to anti-Semitism, some of which might just be made up bullshit about anti-Semitism into whatever he's referring to as the reckless talk over the course of the last year.
Maybe you overheard something at a party.
Over a mythical Jewish groups / alliances yield power over forms of U.S. public life. I am not clear how this is helpful to public discourse, and we could pause here to ask whether it's great for employers to be making determinations about whether everything an employee tweets is useful to public discourse.
My tweets mandatory that all of my tweets be useful to the public. I mean, if that had been the standard, just to point out, I should have been fired like the day I got the job, right? Because
Twitter itself is detrimental to public discourse.
Exactly. If that's the standard we're going to hold tweets to, then everyone should be fired.
Yeah.
And that is the liberals' ultimate goal. Everybody fired.
I mean, that's right. I mean, obviously,
there'll be one person employed, and there'll be a HR rep.
Yeah. Good. It'll be amazing. Actually, you should just have instead of just hitting post when you finish composing a tweet, what you should hit is submit, and there'll be a process to determine whether it's useful to public discourse.
Useful to public discourse, and then and no tweet will ever be posted again.
That's right. And I'm not sure why singling out financial aid to Israel in a tweet and devoid of any context, which is also interesting because
context, which is really easy to put in a tweet, is the context of U.S. foreign aid.
Yeah, no, I mean those 280 characters, you've got plenty of room to put all the context anybody might want about how the budget process works, the history of the U.S. role in the Israel-Palestine conflict. So it's devoid of any context. You didn't include any of that, and without mention of aid to other countries, either currently or historically, is a useful addition to public discourse. So the
public discourse.
Yeah. So the claim is that in that tweet, you should have brought up all the other countries that the U.S. engages in military aid to, even though one. I think that there is actually a disanalogy here, which is that American politicians, they certainly they certainly vote for military aid to lots of places that I wish they would not vote to military aid to, but they don't go on and on and on about what an important point of principle it is for them to give this aid.
Right.
Right. I mean, undeniable.
I didn't create the special relationship with Israel. That's not a function of my tweet. That's a function of United States politics. Joe Biden's the one who said if Israel didn't exist, we'd have to invent it. And Nancy Pelosi's the one who said if Washington, D.C. crumbled to the ground, the last thing that would remain is our support for Israel.
Exactly. Flip in the comment says, "Why did he single out Main Street for his walk?" Which does kind of get to the core of the issue, because one of the fun things about this what about all the other countries' defense, which, as you say, is often used as a defense of U.S. policy or a way to accuse people of being anti-American for opposing it. And was used in the 70s and 80s by defenders and representatives of apartheid South Africa to oppose the movement for divestment from South Africa. So why are they singling out South Africa? Lots of countries commit human rights abuses. So what's so special about South Africa? Which the fun thing about that is because you can literally always play that game. So if you can't criticize anyone when you could criticize someone else instead, like the end result of that is that you just can't criticize anyone. You are free, of course, to use Twitter.
You are free to be fired.
Yeah, right. Which actually does get to a really important point, and one that I think goes back to some of the themes from the conversation with Sean, because I mean that's not much of a like you're free to do this if you want to keep your job is not very reassuring. Well, right? Like this is a point that I remember you made in your article a couple of years ago, actually, when that Janus decision we were talking about earlier was being considered. That the argument that conservatives use to support right to work laws to oppose making people pay agency fees is that if you make somebody do something as a condition of your job, of keeping your job, having a job, then they're not free to not do it. Which, fair enough.
Yes, is the only context in which conservatives ever deploy that argument is to say that mandatory union contracts tied to employment are coercive, but mandatory any other requirement an employer could ever impose, not coercive.
Yeah, because you could always just get another job. But somehow the "you could always get another job" argument doesn't apply to mandatory.
Doesn't apply in the union context.
You're free, of course, to use Twitter in whatever way you choose, but it dismays me that someone who presents themselves as a Guardian columnist would make, as the Guardian website does, would make such a clearly erroneous statement without, as I say, any context / justification. John Mulholland, Guardian, editor-in-chief, and then there's this little extra thing below it. Which
bonus, little lagniappe, as we call it in New Orleans, for that word meaning a little something extra.
Saying that the only Jewish state controls the most powerful country in the world is clearly anti-Semitic. The myth of Jewish power informs murderous hatred. Delete this and apologize, which is actually quite that's a hell of a shift in tone for the little something extra at the end. But
you saying the Jewish people are a weak people, like, you know what I mean? Like the myth of Jewish power would imply that Jewish people are powerless.
So it's also like the remarkable thing about this is in neither of those tweets was there anything actually about like there was any sort of causal claim about why there's this U.S. special relationship with Israel. There was only an assertion of the fact that it exists.
The only thing that I suggested was that U.S. politicians give a hell of a lot of weapons aid to Israel. That's the joke of the tweet, is that we give so much weapons aid, it might as well be the law that we have to. Like, we can't give COVID relief unless we're also giving weapons aid, right? That's the joke. We just give it law. I didn't say if it's legitimate, it's a critique implicitly, but actually, like, it could be that I just think it's a slightly lower priority than COVID relief, right? But I still support it technically from the tweets, right? As I say, there's no context, so you could interpret that in a way that isn't actually particularly unfavorable to Israel, but is just talking about U.S. political priorities.
Yeah, and like I think also, again, it's a completely separate discussion. Like the assertion that these are American political priorities, that politicians, by their own constant explicit statement, do care very, very much about arming and funding Israel to the hilt. That fact could be asserted without having any opinion necessarily about why it is the case. And it's probably like very complicated and multi-causal. I'd point out that at least one of the causes is that evangelical Christians, right-wing evangelical Christians, are a huge voting bloc and are on the whole extremely committed to this policy. We could talk about U.S. strategic interests. This is like the Chomsky explanation of why this exists. That they're sort of served by having that that state that's very, that hyper militarized state that's very dependent on the U.S. like there as a kind of watchdog in the region. And yeah, you could talk about pro-Israel lobbying groups, which is what Ilhan Omar got in trouble for. And I've always also thought it was hilarious that in this one context, you're not allowed to suggest that lobbying works. And that there is a reason why people spend a lot of money on it, because it is actually quite effective. But whatever you think about that, you weren't asserting it. And the thing that gets me about this especially is that this rhetorical strategy saying that the only Jewish state in the world, et cetera, is anti-Semitic basically allows Mulholland to say, people, who have Mulholland's views to say that because Israel is the only Jewish state, that means that any criticism of Israel that has any sort of superficial resemblance to anything that, anti-Semites might say about, Jewish people, in general, is thereby anti-Semitic. And we can just skip the whole question of whether any such assertions are true or false, which is a very common thing that I've like that people will say, oh, it's like a blood libel to say that the Israeli military has committed various war crimes, that it's absolutely committed, and it's an incredibly sleazy thing, and honestly one that I find, I mean, I can't believe I'm going to break my usual habit on this. I will end with an as a, right? That they, as someone who does have some Jewish background and has been the recipient of an occasional anti-Semitic, remark in my life, because having inherited these striking Ashkenazi good looks, that's most people's first guess, about my background. I think it's incredibly sleazy and dangerous because it cheapens the actual charge of anti-Semitism. It makes people not seriously.
Yeah. It's true. Yeah.
I'm just going to say many of the most, specifically anti-Zionist people that I know are Jewish. Like, you know what I mean? That I've known in my lifetime. Like, like a lot of Jewish people have very, very real, very pointed criticisms of Israel and are not.
Yeah, and they resent being held responsible for the actions of the Israeli state and having them done in the name of Judaism, which they find really, really appalling. One of this is what motivates, for example, the anger of someone like Norman Finkelstein, who is viciously critical of Israel, but who comes from the perspective of being a Jew whose entire family, other than his parents, perished in the Holocaust, and his parents were both in Auschwitz, and he gets very, very angry at the suffering and death of his family being used to cover up and paper over and justify and rationalize things that he finds to be atrocities. And I think that anger is quite understandable. I don't agree with everything he says, but I think the source of his emotional anger is very, very understandable to me. Ben, as the left's kind of resident logician, you can see kind of how the ugly kind of sophistry here, which is, it's saying that Israel is powerful. Israel is the only Jewish state. Therefore, this is the myth of Jewish power. Right. So if you say Israel is powerful because Israel is the only Jewish state, therefore you're saying Jews are powerful. Therefore you are engaging in anti-Semitism. And so on the kind of implicit logic.
Yeah, which is amazing. It's right? I mean, this is a version of the fallacy of the undistributed middle. It's literally like saying that cats are mammals and dogs are mammals, so dogs are cats.
So you can see here that if we accept the logic underlying Mulholland's kind of argument, which he doesn't really make explicit, the logic here, we can never say that Israel is a powerful country. We can never say that Israel has strong influence over United States politics because Israel is the only Jewish state Therefore, this is the myth of Jewish power. And so it's really ugly. And the implication of it is essentially, if you take seriously what underlies what he's saying, the actual argument, if you try and figure out what the argument is, it really does immunize Israel from criticism.
Yeah, it does. And again, you can, and it has been applied to all sorts of, of criticisms, that you say, if you say, the Israeli military, has murdered, Palestinian children, which is the same sentence that you would also correctly say about like the American military and Vietnamese children in the 70s or something like that, then people have and will come back and say, oh well this sounds like medieval libels about Jews killing Christian children, and it's again it really cheapens the accusation of the real thing, which is ugly and serious and not going anywhere. And I also think that the point about Finkelstein and all of that does get to something important, which is that it's important to recognize that no ethnic or religious or cultural national community is a hive mind. They all are divided into different ideologies and different different class interests, different etc. And I think that and look, I think sometimes we on the left, fall into to this too, that that we take anything that member of Group X says as representative of the Group X view on that subject. But it's a very I think it's a bad thing to do in general, and it's also a silly thing to do, and I think you can see it in the way it's sometimes weaponized on the other side in these discussions. Like to pick a non-Israel example. I remember a couple of years ago when there was the attempted Guaido coup in Venezuela, seeing at least one daughter of a wealthy Venezuelan immigrant.
Oh God, that was fucking ridiculous.
Saying that she was tired of having white American leftists try to Venezuela-splain to her. That
was fucking ridiculous. That video,
opposing the coup, and this is something that can be done in any number of directions. And I don't want to push the point too far, because I think that there is a legitimate, I think sometimes people are saying something legitimate, which is basically, think about ways that not having had certain experiences might blind you to certain things, and fair enough. Right, like that's not a wholly illegitimate thing, but you have to defer to me on this subject because I'm a member of this group thing, is something that runs, yes, as our graphic designer J. Andrew World says in chat, Jewish people aren't the Borg. There are the individual human beings with different political opinions. As is the case with everybody else, I think.
And Adolph Reed talks about, in the Black community, not the Jewish community, but he talks about it in depth in Class Notes when he's talking about how, he's criticizing Cornel West at the moment because it was before Cornel West kind of had his come to the left moment, I guess, later on. But it's how he criticizes white leftists in this case for kind of seeing everything through a mediator, and liberals as well, seeing everything through that mediator that kind of has to translate some the language for you. And it's always a member of the bourgeois, and it's always somebody that has a vested interest in the status quo remaining the way it is. I don't know. That was a part of the part of Class Notes that really stuck out to me.
Yeah. It is kind of funny that Reed and West used to have some really bitter polemical exchanges.
Yeah.
Because now
he devoted 3 chapters to it in Class Notes. At various times.
Now they're actually quite close. Any case, Nathan, final thoughts about the Guardian and your and this I think we've kind of gone through this absurd email. Yeah, please.
Well, the real disturbing thing, of course, is that they fired me and they made it clear that it was about the tweet, even though I deleted it and even though I groveled, it didn't help. So don't grovel first, because they'll fire you anyway. That's my one regret here, is that I apologized to him because I thought I could keep my job. Couldn't keep my job, so shouldn't have apologized. Shouldn't have said what I didn't.
Props to you for keeping that part in there. You could have just.
Yeah, it doesn't make me look very good. It's shameful, but I wanted to show kind of how the kind of pressure that there is on you to say things that you don't really believe in order to appease your boss and make them lay off you and not fire you. So I don't look great, but
you're about to you're seeing an email that makes it very clear that you can that you're about to lose a massive portion of your income, based on a whim. I mean, I don't know that's that much. I agree with what you're saying, but I could certainly understand how in that moment, well, hell, is there anything I could do to make this, to get out of this, because
save my ass, yeah.
Yeah, it's not worth it,
it's completely understandable. It's just still putting it in there is a
yeah. Well, I'm human. What I think is so alarming is that I haven't seen, and forgive me if there are any exceptions, because I don't scroll through Twitter obsessively. So I have not seen other Guardian writers protest my fire. A lot of people have been very kind and sent very supportive notes. A lot of people have switched their Guardian subscriptions to current affairs, which is very nice. But I haven't seen Guardian writers saying anything about this publicly, and I understand why. Right? Because he has the same power over them that he had over me, which is that if they tick him off, they're gone. That's their right. So they have to make a calculation right now, which is, are they willing to give up their fucking writing career for this prestigious post for the sake of something that isn't going to go anywhere? It's not going to get me my job back. So I think it's important to recognize that the people who are still at The Guardian, I've been fired, but are really under the thumb of the editors, even though they're a union company, because poisoning your relationship with them just it hurts you as a writer. And The Guardian is such a gatekeeper because they are the most progressive paper, and this is important. They're not a reactionary paper. They publish articles critical of Israel, right? It's not like they publish nothing against Israel. They do. But The Guardian is this gate, but they want to have complete control over and what their writers say, and don't say anything unapproved. And they're very, very sensitive to possible charges of anti-Semitism, so they want to carefully police what they put out about Israel. And it means that all of the writers who are still there are under constant threat. They cannot, and now that I have been fired and made an example of, all of them know that if they tweet the wrong thing about Israel, they're out. They're gone. And immediately. There's no opportunity. You can apologize. You can delete it. It doesn't matter. You're gone. And Mulholland is watching your tweets, right? And I'm not sure who his UK equivalent is. He's the US editor, but he's watching. And so they know that. So I think it's really important to bear in mind that everything you see written publicly, every public statement by someone who is affiliated with this institution is being screened. And they all know inside their heads that if they say the wrong thing, they can be terminated. And so just bear that in mind, that there are things that they would say that they are not saying because they know what will happen.
Yeah, and that was the thought that I kind of had reading this article the first time, was how many people have kind of had careers buried that haven't had, that don't have editorial freedom at a, even if it's not a publication of the same size, to publish whatever they want after the fact.
I'll tell you, Forrest, people have contacted me since this and told me their stories, and they do not want me to tell their names. They don't even want me to publish their stories anonymously. Some of them are bound by non-disclosure agreements. Some of them just don't have non-disclosure agreements, but they just need jobs in the future, who are telling me very, very similar things happen to them. But it's a rare person who is in the position to just torch their relationship with one of the most prestigious and powerful newspapers in the world, because I'm not just torching my relationship with The Guardian. I'm making it basically so that I won't ever. I mean, maybe I don't know. There might be some rogue editor who likes it, but having shown that I'm willing to disclose an internal email like that means that no sensible editor is ever going to want to work with me, because they know that I am a loose cannon. Or so unless you can afford.
Or at the very least, they'll give you a very restrictive non-disclosure agreement or something like that. You know what I mean?
Well, yes, right? If I get another contract, right, it's probably going to have terms, and I'm going to have to decide whether I'm willing to abide by those terms. There are other things that I know that have happened, that I've seen in institutions, that I can't talk about because they'd have consequences for people. Right? And I don't want to hurt people. I want people to understand how the media really works, but because of how power works, I can't give an honest accounting of what is going on in these institutions, because everyone is under threat by the boss.
Yeah. So turns out that flexibility is not actually is not actually good for the vast majority of people, and among very many other things, and the many ways that it makes people's lives absolutely miserable on the bottom tier of the economy. It's also very bad for media just on its own terms, because if you want people, like, if you want to have the sort of media culture where people are having like an aggressive, debate, about, what's the Dave Rubin thing, high level ideas, then you don't, then you don't actually want people, to be constantly looking over their shoulder, because they know it's going to be really easy to fire them, and that even something like a tweet, that takes, like, most people think about tweets for like 3 seconds before they post them. And that they is obviously outside of a work context, they can be fired for, and I think that, like, especially if you want that kind of media culture, I mean, Nathan is exactly who you want to be uninhibited, because there's no like anything that the fact that he's gonna write stuff like the 10,000 word takedown of Mayor Pete, or various conservative media figures. I mean, if you want your sort of high level debate about ideas in the media, that's what it looks like. And so I think for that and many other reasons, this is a very ominous story about the Guardian.